There have been an army of supporters and advocates and heroes who have rallied to uncover the truth about Morgan's disappearance, and you see those people here in this room today. And what I have to say about Billy Jack Links is that he stole Morgan from me. He stole her from her dad. And he stole her from Logan and Taryn. But he didn't see that he could never win. Because our love for Morgan, her memory, and her voice outlasted his life. And that love continues to shine. Her heart, Morgan's heart, shines on.
A red truck, sitting in a junkyard for over 2 decades, rusting, silent, forgotten. Inside it, a secret that would take 29 years, a mother who refused to quit, and a single strand of hair to finally uncover. This is one of the most haunting missing child cases in American history, and the answer was hiding in plain sight the entire time. June 9th, 1995, Alma, Arkansas. A 6-year-old girl named Morgan Nick leaves her mother's side for 10 minutes to catch fireflies at a Little League baseball game. She is never seen again. What investigators would later discover is that the man responsible had already been in that area for hours before Morgan. He had already made contact with 4 other children that same day. Nobody reported him. If anyone had, Morgan Nick would never have walked into that parking lot. For 29 years, where law enforcement chased thousands of leads, ran down hundreds of suspects, and came up empty every single time, the case went cold. The trail went cold. But one person never did: her mother. And in 2024, nearly 3 decades after Morgan disappeared, detectives finally lifted a floor mat inside a rusted red truck and found what no one had thought to look for. What was underneath changed everything, but it also raised a question that remains unanswered to this day. A question that keeps Colleen Nick fighting, even now. Where is Morgan? She was 6 years old, 4 feet tall, 55 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes, 5 silver caps on her back molars, and a purple vein along the lower left side of her rib cage. A detail so specific that investigators would carry it in their files for the next 30 years. And in case they ever needed to make an identification. Her name was Morgan Chantel Nick, born September 12, 1988, in Europe, while her father served overseas with the U.S. military. When the family came home, they settled in Ozark, Arkansas, 30 minutes east of Alma. Morgan was the oldest of 3, a Girl Scout, a cat lover. She thought bubblegum was a food group, hated playing outside because it made her sweat, and had decided she wanted to be both a circus performer and a doctor when she grew up. She was 6. She still had time. On the evening of June 9th, 1995, Colleen drove the 30 minutes from Ozark to Alma for a Little League game at Wofford Field. Guests of a family friend. Logan and Taryn were at their grandmother's house. That made the night something rarer than it sounds. Just Colleen and Morgan, alone together. They weren't locals. They didn't know the field, the parking lot, or the streets around it. Morgan was wearing her green Girl Scout t-shirt, blue denim shorts, and white tennis shoes. Around 10:30 p.m., 2 children approached. Ty, 10 years old. Jessica, 8. They asked Morgan to come play. Colleen said no. The game was ending. It was late. When they came back a second time asking her to catch fireflies in the parking lot, other parents nearby told Colleen to relax, that she worried too much, that the area was safe. She changed her mind. At 10:45 p.m., Ty and Jessica walked back toward the bleachers. Morgan was not with them. She was last seen at the rear of Colleen's Nissan Stanza, shaking sand from her white tennis shoes. Ty and Jessica were a few dozen feet ahead, near the front of the car. Eyewitnesses later told investigators they saw a man near Morgan while she crouched down, someone they assumed was a father, someone who belonged there. By the time the parking lot cleared, everyone had assumed something. Nobody had looked back. Colleen searched under every car in that lot. She found nothing. She grabbed someone with a cell phone and told them to call the police. The call went out just before 11 p.m. What followed was 30 years of leads, digs, dead ends, and false confessions. More than 10,000 tips worked and discarded. Properties searched in 2 states. Suspects named and buried. But the answer had been available from the very first hour, buried inside one fact that nobody in that parking lot understood yet. The man who took Morgan hadn't stumbled onto Wofford Field. He'd been in Alma all day. And before he reached that parking lot, he had already put his hands on another child. Sergeant Harris was first on scene. Chief of Police Russell White was contacted immediately. Within hours, the Arkansas State Police and the FBI were in Alma. The town's first instinct was denial. Jeff Pointer, who would later become chief of police, but in June 1995 was a teenager finishing high school, recalled that the initial consensus was that Morgan had wandered off, gone to a friend's house, that she'd turn up. That thinking didn't last long. By morning, investigators had a composite and a full description. White male, 23 to 38 years old, 6 feet tall, 180 pounds, black or salt and pepper hair combed back, possibly curly, mustache, 3 to 4 days of beard growth, cut-off blue jean shorts, no shirt, or no shoes, a hillbilly-type accent. His truck, a red pickup with a white camper shell sitting 4 to 5 inches shorter than the truck bed. Curtains covering the camper windows. Dull paint, short wheelbase, possible damage to the right rear of the camper. A parent at the game had been filming that evening. When investigators reviewed the footage, the truck was right there, visible in the background between 5:30 and 7 p.m., more than 5 hours before Morgan disappeared. It had been in that parking lot all evening. No parent could identify the owner. Witnesses had noted license plates. Investigators ran everyone through Arkansas state databases. Every plate came back with no record. Not one was real, misread, switched, or fabricated. The man had covered that detail before he arrived. The make of the truck created a separate problem. Based on one witness, investigators focused on Ford pickups. But 8-year-old Jessica never wavered. She said it looked like a Chevrolet, boxy, square, like her family's. She was a child, so her account was weighted accordingly. It would take until 2020 to confirm she was right. The truck was a 1986 Chevrolet Scottsdale. Jessica had identified it correctly 25 years before anyone found it. The dragnet was wide and blunt. Hundreds of red truck owners across the region were stopped, questioned, and cleared. Tim Reed of Alma was pulled over twice. His truck matched. He was innocent, one of hundreds of men caught in a search built on a wrong make and plates that didn't exist. What investigators didn't yet know was that Morgan wasn't his first attempt that day. That morning, June 9th, hours before the baseball game, a man grabbed a 4-year-old girl at a coin-operated laundromat in downtown Alma. He pulled her into the back of his red pickup. Her mother heard the child scream, ran to the truck, and pulled her out. She didn't call the police. She came forward only after hearing about Morgan that night. The next day, June 10th, 15 miles away in Fort Smith, a man matching the same description tried to force a 9-year-old girl into the men's restroom of a convenience store. She resisted. He walked out. Authorities confirmed both incidents involved the same man they believed took Morgan Nick. Alma's mayor, John R. Ballantyne, stated publicly that he believes he personally saw the abductor somewhere in Alma earlier that day. Years later, our Detective Brett Hartley would map every witness statement from June 9th geographically. The red truck had moved through at least 7 locations across Alma, starting in the afternoon, working toward the baseball field, approaching children at multiple stops. The laundromat was location 1. Wofford Field was location 5. The truck didn't stop there. Within 24 hours, the case was national. A composite, a partial truck description, thousands of tips, the FBI on the ground, and a set of license plates that led nowhere. He had run false plates before he ever pulled into that parking lot, which meant this wasn't impulse. It wasn't opportunity. It was preparation. And the only question investigators couldn't answer yet was how many times he'd done it before, and how many of those times no one had ever come forward at all. But within days, Morgan Nick's face was everywhere. America's Most Wanted ran the case. John Walsh made a direct appeal to anyone who had seen that red truck. Unsolved mysteries followed. A command center opened in Alma, fielding calls around the clock. Tips came in by the thousands and kept coming. By the time investigators finally had a name, they had worked through more than 10,000 leads. The community didn't wait to be organized. Billboards went up along I-40, Alma, Fort Smith, Little Rock, Northwest Arkansas, each carrying an age progression image of Morgan. T-shirts, bumper stickers, flyers, printed and distributed by people who had never met the Nick family and couldn't stand doing nothing. 2 weeks after Morgan disappeared, her father John sat alone in his car during a thunderstorm. He would later say he almost didn't make it through that night. He recorded a Father's Day message anyway. "Morgan, it's Father's Day. I want to see you before the day's over." The case had been told largely through Colleen, her searches, her foundation, her persistence. But John was in that storm too. So were Logan and Taryn, who would grow up in a house where her sister's absence was the defining fact of every room. Taryn had been 22 months old the night Morgan disappeared. She would have no memory of her at all. 15 days after the abduction, the phone rang with what sounded like a break. June 24th. Stuttgart, Arkansas, nearly 200 miles from Alma. A man named Albert Harvey filed a police report claiming he had spotted a girl matching Morgan's description in a wooded area. Law enforcement mobilized. Colleen and her family were flown in. A large search was mounted. Harvey had fabricated every word of it. When the search turned up nothing, he admitted he'd invented the sighting for attention. He was charged with interfering with government operations and filing a false police report. Colleen had prepared herself to see Morgan. She had made herself ready. Whatever condition her daughter might be in, Harvey's lie didn't just waste resources. It forced a mother to brace for a reunion that never came, then collapse back into the waiting. That kind of damage doesn't have a charge attached to it. If you follow cases like this, where the answers hide for decades and one family's refusal to quit changes everything, subscribe right now. Every week we cover the cases that refuse to stay cold. Hit the bell so you never miss an update. The investigation ground forward. On January 4th, 2001, police released an updated composite sketch, revised based on additional witness input gathered over 5 years. A public acknowledgement that the original hadn't been enough, that the man was still unidentified, still free. The case also drew a different kind of predator. In June 2012, 17 years after the abduction, a woman named Tanya Renee Smith and a man named James Monhart were arrested for computer fraud. They had attempted to steal Morgan Nick's identity, trying to purchase her birth certificate and other vital personal documents. Both were convicted felons. Morgan had been missing for nearly 2 decades. Someone was still trying to use her name. Colleen didn't spend those years waiting. In 1996, she founded the Morgan Nick Foundation. That same year, Arkansas named its statewide alert system the Morgan Nick Amber Alert. She traveled to Washington and stood in the room when the president signed an executive order mandating missing children's photos in all federal buildings. She joined the board of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and alongside Patty Wetterling, whose 11-year-old son Jacob had been abducted at gunpoint in Minnesota in 1989, co-founded Team Hope, NCMEC's peer support network for families of missing and exploited children. 2 mothers who never got their children back, building infrastructure so other families wouldn't drown alone. Then, 5 years after Morgan vanished, Alma police arrested a man just miles from Wofford Field. A convicted killer. DNA already tied to 2 murders in the same 20-mile radius. Prosecutors sat him down and put 5 unsolved cases on the table. Morgan Nick's name was first. He looked at investigators and denied it. But that wasn't the part that kept them up at night. The part that kept them up was that they believed him. In March 2000, a man came home and found his neighbor's truck in his driveway. He went inside and found the neighbor assaulting his daughter. Police arrested 36-year-old Charles Ray Vines. DNA connected him to the murders of 58-year-old Juanita Wofford and 74-year-old Ruth Pearl Henderson, and the attempted murder of James Quall's daughter, all within 20 miles of Wofford Field. Prosecutors offered a deal: confess to everything, avoid the death penalty. Vines took it. He admitted to multiple crimes, including beating a 93-year-old woman in Fort Smith. Then, investigators put 5 unsolved cases on the table: Morgan Nick, Melissa Witt, Lori Murchison, Dora Doe, Juanita Wofford. Vines denied Morgan. Specifically, without hesitation, no physical evidence connected him to her. Investigators believed him. Colleen's response was precise. Even if Vines were responsible, Morgan was still not home. The leads could not stop. Melissa Witt had disappeared 6 months before Morgan. December 1st, 1994, Fort Smith, 19 years old, abducted from a bowling alley parking lot. Her body was found by 2 trappers in the Ozark National Forest, 50 miles from where she was taken. Investigators examined whether the same man was responsible for both. The geography made it impossible to ignore: a bowling alley, a laundromat, a baseball field, a convenience store. Different locations, different victims, and overlapping years. Whatever was moving through that corridor wasn't finished after Morgan. 5 days after the abduction, Alma police announced they needed to question 40-year-old Mark Waddle, outstanding warrant out of Washington State for rape of a minor and sexual abuse of a minor. Arrested at a job site in Mulberry, 15 minutes from Alma. Not a suspect in Morgan's case, but that record, that proximity. 5 days later, investigators had no choice. He was cleared. The case moved on. The searches that followed over the next 2 decades shared the same shape: a specific tip, a mobilization, and nothing. January 2002. Private land in Boonville, Arkansas. Cadaver dog. Full search. Called off at 9:30 p.m. with no findings. November 2010. A vacant house in Spiro, Oklahoma. The federal investigators looking for DNA evidence that could place Morgan at the location. Nothing. December 2017. The same property in Spiro. New tip. This time, cadaver dogs alerted to a well on the grounds, the focal point of the entire search. 2 days of work. Nothing. The property belonged to a person of interest who had been on investigators' radar since 1995. He was later convicted and sent to the Oklahoma State Penitentiary for rape and child molestation. His name has never been made public. In 2019, the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation added Morgan's photograph to a deck of cold case playing cards distributed across the state prison system. Year 24. Still trying everything. Chief Russell White had been there from the first night, the face of the investigation for 2 decades. He stepped back the way men do after carrying something that never resolves. He would later say, when a name finally surfaced, that it was not a surprise, that this person had been looming in the background for a long time. Jeff Pointer, the teenager finishing high school in 1995, had joined the department in 1998 as a dispatcher. He was now chief. In 2019, he assigned Detective Brett Hartley as lead investigator with a single directive: start over. Read everything, find what was missed. Hartley pulled every witness statement from June 9, 1995, and read them in sequence. 24 years of accumulated paper. The thread was there. It had always been there, written down in the summer of 1995 by someone who didn't know what they were holding. It led to a truck. The truck belonged to a dead man. And when Hartley pulled up the photograph, he said 3 words out loud to an empty room. I'm looking at it. Brett Hartley's assignment in 2019 came with a single premise: someone may have missed something, not as an accusation, as a possibility. And if it was possible, It was the department's obligation to find out. He started at June 9th, 1995. Every witness statement, in sequence, mapped against geography. What he found wasn't a missed detail. It was a missed pattern. The truck hadn't appeared at Wofford Field that night. It had been moving through Alma since the afternoon, and Hartley could prove it, stop by stop. Near downtown, a teenage girl was approached. The driver pulled over, reversed, asked if she wanted a ride. When she said no, he didn't leave. She ran. 2 children, 5 and 6 years old, were playing on their front lawn when the truck rolled slowly past. And they ran inside, screaming. 2 teenage boys walking from an older baseball field were yelled at for being in the road. One of them watched the truck turn onto Walnut Street. Walnut Street leads directly to Wofford Field. Shortly after, 2 10-year-old boys were yelled at by the same driver on the same road. Location 5 was the Wofford Field parking lot. Location 6 was the home video, filmed by a parent between 5:30 and 7 p.m., the truck sitting in the background of footage that had existed since the first week of the investigation. Location 7. A group of teenagers parked near the river. Within 10 minutes of the abduction, they saw the truck. They believed they watched the driver restraining someone in the front seat. 7 locations. One day, the same driver at every stop. Not wandering, not lost. Working his way through town, testing each approach, reading which children were alone and which weren't. By the time he reached Wofford Field, he had already been turned away multiple times. Morgan was not a random choice. She was the one he finally got. In 1995, the witness reported plates had been run through Arkansas state databases. No record. Hartley ran the same plates through the FBI's national database in 2019. He got hits. A photograph loaded on his screen, a red truck with a white camper shell. Oh my God, I'm looking at the truck. Around the same time, a witness walked into the station. He'd given information in 1995 and felt it had gone nowhere. He was irritated. He told Hartley, "I'm the one with the information you need." He gave one name, Billy Jack Lynx. That name was already in the files. August 29th, 1995. On Van Buren, Arkansas, 15 miles from Alma, 10 weeks after Morgan disappeared. An 11-year-old girl at the local Sonic with her 2 brothers. A man in a red Chevy pickup pulled up drunk, offered the brothers money to leave so he could be alone with her. They refused. He offered the girl money directly. She threatened to call the police. He drove off, hit a telephone pole, left red paint on the concrete, and fled. A witness took down the plate. It came back registered to Billy Jack Lynx. When investigators arrived, the truck was in his driveway, damaged at the front. Inside, duct tape, a tarp, rope, a machete, hair fibers, blood. DNA technology in 1995 couldn't extract a usable profile from the samples. They were logged and stored. Detective Kevin Johnson interviewed Lynx, who claimed he was too drunk to remember what he'd said to the girl, but recalled everything else about the evening clearly. Johnson didn't believe him. A polygraph was administered. Lynx passed. The lead was closed. One more detail had been sitting in that same file since 1995. A neighbor's statement, collected during the Sonic investigation. The truck had a white camper shell until approximately 2 months before Morgan's disappearance. Removed around April 1995, before the abduction. Before any witness had reason to describe it, he took it off in advance. Lynx was convicted of the Sonic incident in 1996. He died at Tucker Unit Prison on August 5th, 75 years old. The truck was sold, auctioned, passed through multiple owners over 25 years. By the time Hartley had a name and a vehicle to trace, and the assumption was that any physical evidence inside that truck was gone. That assumption was about to cost the investigation nothing, because the evidence wasn't gone. It was waiting. Billy Jack Lynx was born and raised in Crawford County, Arkansas. He served in the Army during World War II, spent 12 years working for Braniff Airlines in Dallas, and returned to Van Buren in the late 1970s. On paper, a quiet life. In 1984, Van Buren detective Kevin Johnson arrested Lynx for driving under the influence. Routine stop. Nothing that flagged him as anything beyond a man with a drinking problem. Johnson filed the report and moved on. No way of knowing he'd spend the next decade crossing paths with the same man, or that the last time would matter most. In 1992, Lynx was charged in Crawford County with raping a child under 14. He was held on $10,000 bail. In January 1993, he pleaded no contest to a reduced charge. First-degree sexual abuse, a Class C felony. Under Arkansas law, that carried 3 to 10 years in prison. He received a 5-year fully suspended sentence, counseling, a $500 fine, 0 days in jail. The system had Billy Jack Lynx in 1992, had his name, his charge, his plea. It released him. 3 years later, he was driving a red pickup through Alma, stopping at 7 locations, approaching children. The court that suspended that sentence in January 1993 will never be asked to answer for June 9, 1995. But the line between those two dates is straight and unbroken. After the Sonic incident, it was Kevin Johnson, the same detective who had arrested Lynx for DUI 11 years earlier, who sat across from him in the interview room. Lynx remembered the evening clearly, but claimed he couldn't recall what he'd said to the girl. Johnson didn't believe him. In March 1996, Lynx was convicted of sexual solicitation of a child and sentenced to 6 years. He died at Tucker Unit on August 5, 2000, 75 years old. He was never charged with anything related to Morgan Nick, never sat in a room and answered for June 9th. He died serving time for a Sonic parking lot, not a baseball field. His truck was a 1986 Chevrolet Scottsdale, red, short wheelbase, boxy and square, exactly what 8-year-old Jessica had described from the night of the abduction. For 25 years, that the investigation had prioritized accounts pointing toward Ford. Jessica was right from the beginning. The camper shell had been removed around April 1995, 2 months before Morgan disappeared. 4 bolt holes remained in the truck bed where it had been mounted. The shell's windows had been covered with curtains, exactly as witnesses described. Lynx pulled the entire assembly before the abduction, before there was a description to avoid matching. That is not impulse. That is preparation. The complete profile is this: a man with a conviction for child sexual abuse, operating in a corridor where children had been approached, abducted, and murdered across a narrow window of years. A man who spent June 9th driving through Alma, testing 7 locations before reaching Morgan, who ran false plates, removed his camper shell in advance. He passed a polygraph and died in prison on an unrelated charge, leaving behind one thing: a truck, sold, auctioned, passed through multiple owners over 25 years, long assumed to hold nothing. In 2020, Hartley found it. The current owner had no idea what it had been part of. They agreed to let investigators search it. The FBI evidence response team moved in and vacuumed every surface, every seam, every crevice. What came out of that truck would take 4 more years and a private laboratory in Texas to fully understand. But one item, recovered from beneath the floor mat, would eventually answer the question that had been open since June 9, 1995. A single hair. The FBI evidence response team vacuumed the 1986 Chevrolet Scottsdale. Every seam, every crevice, and every surface that had sat untouched through 5 owners in 25 years. Among the recoveries, blue-green cotton fibers consistent with Morgan's Girl Scout t-shirt, the green shirt she was wearing the night she disappeared. FBI Special Agent Reuben Gay stated the lab determined it was highly unlikely those fibers came from any other source. Everything went to the FBI crime lab. The results came back inconclusive. 25 years of degradation had pushed the samples past what 2020 technology could process. Not enough usable DNA. The fibers pointed directly at Morgan. The hair had no profile to give. On November 9th, 2021, 26 years after the abduction, investigators said his name publicly for the first time: Billy Jack Lynx, person of interest. The FBI's Little Rock field office released his 1994 driver's license photo and asked anyone who knew him, his movements, his associates, his life in 1995, to come forward. For Colleen, a name after 26 years brought relief and devastation simultaneously. Direction meant the investigation had finally locked onto something. It also meant the man was dead. No arrest, no confrontation. Whatever Lynx knew, he had already taken it. The question was no longer who. It was where. In February 2023, ABC News Studios released Still Missing Morgan, a 4-part docu-series on Hulu. Colleen said it generated over 200 new leads and put the case in front of an audience that had never heard of Alma or a baseball field parking lot in June 1995. Late 2023. Colleen was still researching, still reading, while still refusing to accept that the available tools were the only tools. She found a reference to Othram Labs, a private DNA laboratory founded in 2018 in the Woodlands, Texas, specializing in forensic genealogy and genome sequencing from degraded biological material. She called Detective Sean Taylor. Had he heard of them? He hadn't. She sent him the article. He agreed immediately. Othram's method, forensic-grade genome sequencing, extracts a DNA profile from a rootless hair using 500,000 data points, not markers, the genome itself. Combined with KIN-SNP rapid relationship testing, it can identify biological relatives from material that has been degrading for decades. Colleen submitted a reference DNA sample. The comparison group was set. On December 1st, 2023, Detective Sean Taylor submitted the evidence to Othram, including the blonde hair recovered from beneath the floor mat of Billy Jack Lynx's 1986 Chevrolet Scottsdale. Then they waited. The report came back September 27th, 2024. The hair belonged to either Colleen Nick, one of her siblings, or one of her children. None of them had ever met Billy Jack Lynx. None had ever been inside that truck. Investigators interviewed the Nick family over the following weekend, eliminating every alternative explanation they could construct. There was no other explanation. The hair was Morgan's. Othram's chief development officer, Kristen Middleman, later stated that with current technology, a case like Morgan's would be solved in days, not decades. Arkansas Crime Lab Deputy Director Jennifer Beatty West confirmed the breakthrough had already opened new pathways for cold cases across the state. 29 years of investigation, a fiber match that couldn't be confirmed, a polygraph that cleared the right man. On what broke the case was a single hair under a floor mat, found in a truck most people had written off. Colleen found the lab, sent the article, submitted the sample. She broke her own daughter's case. This case is still active. Investigators are still looking for anyone who knew Billy Jack Lynx or had information about his movements in 1995. If you want to stay current on cases like this, where the science finally catches up to the crime, subscribe and hit the bell now. You will not want to miss what comes next. October 1st, 2024. 29 years, 3 months, and 22 days after Morgan Nick disappeared from a parking lot in Alma, Arkansas. The Alma Police Department called a press conference. The room filled. The cameras came on. Chief Jeff Pointer stepped to the podium. The same man who had been a teenager finishing high school the night it happened, who had spent his entire law enforcement career in the shadow of this case. He looked into the cameras and said the name. October 1st, 2024. Alma, Arkansas. Chief Jeff Pointer stood at the podium and stated it plainly. Physical evidence collected from the 1986 Chevrolet Scottsdale strongly indicates Morgan Nick had been inside that vehicle. Billy Jack Lynx was the primary suspect in her disappearance. 29 years to say it in a room with cameras. Pointer didn't stop at the naming. He laid out 4 questions the investigation still cannot answer. And the fact that he named them publicly meant none of them were close. How exactly was Morgan taken from that parking lot? Witnesses saw a man near her. Nobody saw what happened in the seconds that followed. That gap has never closed. What happened after the abduction? Where Lynx went? What route he took? Nothing confirmed. Did Lynx have help? In the abduction itself, or in keeping it concealed for 3 decades? Someone who knew, stayed quiet, and may still be alive. And where is Morgan now? 4 questions, no answers. 29 years in. There will be no arrest, no trial, no moment in a courtroom where a verdict lands and a family watches a man's face. Lynx died at Tucker Unit on August 5, 2000, serving 6 years for soliciting a child at a Sonic drive-in, never charged with anything related to Morgan. The legal system processed him once for a parking lot in Van Buren and closed his file, as if that were the full accounting. It wasn't. The Nick family has had to hold something with no container, justice that will never take the shape justice is supposed to take. The man who took Morgan died in a cell, on an unrelated conviction, 24 years before anyone said his name at a podium. Colleen spoke. She addressed Lynx directly. He had stolen Morgan from her. From John, from Logan, from Taryn, 22 months old when her sister disappeared, who grew up shaped entirely by that absence, and who gave an interview in 2025 about grieving someone she was too young to remember. He didn't see that he could never win, because our love for Morgan, her memory, her voice, outlasted his life, and that love continues to shine. Separately, Colleen told reporters the DNA result had devastated her, that it felt like losing Morgan a second time. Confirmation that her daughter had been in that truck was not relief. It was grief arriving again with forensic evidence attached. But it gave the investigation what it had never had. A name the science had placed at the center. A direction that held. Former Chief Russell White issued a statement. Lynx had not been a surprise. He had been looming in the background for a long time. The department had circled back to him multiple times. They just never had enough. Until a mother found a laboratory in Texas, sent a detective an article, and submitted her own DNA as the reference sample. The investigation continues. Every known associate of Billy Jack Lynx is being re-interviewed. Anyone who knew him in 1995. Anyone who stayed quiet for 3 decades and is still alive. The tip line has been active for 30 years. It has never been turned off. 1-800-THE-LOST. Lynx is gone. The case is not. Because the question that has never been answered, the one Colleen Nick has carried since June 9, 1995, was never about who. It was always where, and nobody has answered it yet. In 1996, 1 year after Morgan disappeared, Colleen Nick founded the Morgan Nick Foundation, not eventually. 1 year later, the foundation has delivered face-to-face safety presentations to over 40,000 children across Arkansas. Cyber safety, sex trafficking awareness, personal safety. Colleen joined the board of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. With Patty Wetterling, whose son Jacob was abducted at gunpoint in Minnesota in 1989 and never came home, she co-founded Team Hope, NCMEC's peer support network for families of missing and exploited children. That same year, Arkansas named its statewide alert system the Morgan Nick Amber Alert. 2 mothers who never got their children back, building the infrastructure so other families wouldn't face that darkness without a map. On May 3, 2019, Colleen stood beside Governor Asa Hutchinson as he signed House Bill 1674 into law, creating 12 child abduction response teams, each attached to Arkansas State Police Headquarters, built to deploy the moment a child goes missing. 8 months later, the law was tested. January 2020, Sherwood, Arkansas. 6-year-old Julian Boyd vanished after his parents were found murdered in their home. CART deployed. The boy was found alive within 2 hours. That child came home because Colleen Nick spent 24 years turning her loss into legislation. June 9, 2025, the 30th anniversary. Morgan would have been 36 years old. The Arkansas State Capitol was lit in pink. Alma police confirmed active leads are still coming in. Because Lynx is dead, investigators are not closing the circle around him. They are pursuing whether anyone helped him or carries knowledge of what happened after that parking lot. Additional names have not been ruled out. On June 9th and 10th, Chasing Fireflies, a 2-hour documentary, aired on local television and streamed on 479 First. Colleen, Chief Pointer, Detective Taylor, former Chief White, forensic artist Christy Andrews, who spent 30 years updating Morgan's age progression images, former governors Hutchinson and Huckabee, and Major Stacy Rhodes of the Arkansas State Police Cold Case Unit. 30 years of people who refused to let it go quiet in one room in the same week it began. Major Rhodes' Cold Case Unit, built from the pressure this case created, had reviewed 165 cases by June 2025. 3 solved, several unidentified sets of human remains identified. Arkansas Attorney General Tim Griffin stated the Morgan Nick case directly shaped how his office approaches forensic genealogy. Othram Labs' methodology here is now cited nationally as a model for advanced DNA technology applied to decades-old evidence. One case, one mother. 30 years of refusing to accept the available tools as the final tools. The ripple is still moving. Morgan loved fireflies, and that's what pulled her away from her mother's side. The promise of catching something that glows in the dark. For 30 years, Colleen has held that image differently. Not as the thing that cost her Morgan. As the symbol of what she chose to do instead. Keep the light on, refuse to let a missing child stay invisible, work every tool available until a better one exists. The man who took Morgan is dead. The case he left behind is not. Morgan Nick has never been found. This case is still open. If you have any information about Billy Jack Links, his associates, or Morgan's disappearance, the number has been active for 30 years and has never been turned off. 1-800-THE-LOST. Share this video. Because the most powerful thing any of us can do for a case like this is the same thing Colleen Nick has done since 1995. Refuse to let it go quiet.